I personally started to practice NoFap and then also semen retention around 8 years ago in my mid to late teenager years. And since then it definitely helped me in some ways, but it also came with its own struggle, with its own suffering. And in this video, I just want to dive into this journey that I've been in or been through until this point in time. And yeah, I want to elaborate on why I decided to no longer practice NoFap and semen retention. And yeah, just everything that led me to this point, the highs and the lows, the good and the bad side of NoFap. And from my understanding, NoFap is just a little bit more about self-improvement, whereas semen retention, it's often a bit more holistic, so to speak. It's often coupled with certain diets, certain meditation, or certain spiritual practices. It's often practiced in the context of spirituality and religion. And yeah, then the more common understanding is just that NoFap is mainly about restricting yourself or not doing certain things when you're alone, like watching porn, like masturbating, and like having an orgasm. And then with semen retention, that's also extended to when you're with a partner, when you're with someone else. So even then, you're basically not allowed, or you decide that also then you don't want to ejaculate or have an orgasm in the classical sense. Non-ejaculatory orgasms are then also allowed, but that's another thing, maybe for another time. Yeah, so that's just something that I wanted to clarify before I go into more details. And when I say that NoFap had certain benefits for me, then I can say that it worked to some degree, that it actually helped me to be more confident in a sense, have more clarity, be more productive, be more driven, which are some of the things that are kind of the promise of NoFap. And I also came from this place, which may be also important to mention, where I felt, maybe it's not so uncommon for a teenager, but I felt very insecure, very introverted in the sense of when I was in social settings, I wasn't really able to express myself a lot, or I was very hesitant and shy, and I just wanted to protect myself essentially by not doing anything or saying anything. And yeah, I also had a lot of crushes in school or in summertime. But yeah, I mostly felt rejected by the girls back then, and later on also by women. And yeah, then I also started to kind of realize or see that maybe I was then just abusing porn, which I eventually discovered also relatively early on, when the first smartphones came onto the market. And yeah, in this sense, there's this hope that if you don't watch porn, if you don't overstimulate yourself, if you don't escape from your feelings and maybe also your duties in life, the things you have to do. So if you don't procrastinate, if you don't pleasure yourself without any effort, basically, if you just get so much dopamine without putting in any work, then if you stop doing that, then your life will change for the better, and everything will be fine. You will have success in dating again and so on. And I think this is true partially. And I also noticed that I was succeeding and also my life was getting better in some ways, that I was getting more confidence, more easily able to express myself in social settings and also with women. And I think largely this is true because you start to have this idea or this goal of not masturbating, of not watching porn. And then when you're able to fulfill it, which is difficult if you ever tried this, then you're succeeding in something that's very difficult, and then you have the sense of accomplishment. You feel like, in German it's called Selbstwirksamkeit. So you feel a certain sense of self, let's say, execution. Sure, there's a better word for it, but you're just executing on your own internal ideas of how you should behave. And then when you fulfill it, you feel good about yourself. And then when you feel good about yourself, you kind of start this virtuous circle where you feel good. And when you feel good, you have more energy, so maybe you're also more productive. And when you're productive and you do your laundry or you do your homework, you study, you go to the gym, you do certain things, then you feel even better because then you're even more aligned with the idea you have about yourself or with this ideal version of yourself. You're more aligned with that, and then you feel even better. And then you feel confident and good about yourself, and then other people also notice that you feel good about yourself, that you're confident, and then they also want to be around you, and they also want to listen to you or spend more time with you, and then you feel even better about yourself. So it kind of stacks onto, like, one thing stacks onto the other. And the foundation is not watching porn, not masturbating. But then the reason why this is also very tricky, or this isn't just blue skies and rainbows and everything's fine and everything's great, because eventually we all relapse, or I then also often relapsed. And it sounds a bit harsh, the word relapse, but if you consider that you have a porn addiction, then yeah, it's relapsing, you're going back to your old ways. But it's kind of inevitable, or it will happen at some point, sooner or later, often sooner than later. And then this whole thing that you've built of feeling good about yourself, like, it gets destroyed. It's kind of like the foundation gets pulled away from how you feel about yourself. The image, the alignment gets destroyed. And then you're just falling, and you're falling through the floor essentially. And then you start to feel very bad about yourself. You feel like a failure. You feel like this is just another confirmation of you're not being disciplined enough, you're not good enough, you're not able to fulfill the idea that you have about yourself. And then just spirals in the other direction. So then it's a vicious circle, not a virtuous circle anymore. Yeah, and then it's the same thing. It gets just worse and worse because you feel bad about yourself. Then maybe you're not going to the gym because you feel bad. Then you feel even worse because you didn't go to the gym. Then you try to cope even more with maybe eating some junk food. Then you feel even worse because you didn't go to the gym. You eat something bad. And yeah, it just gets very messy and very ugly even. And yeah, with this understanding that there are these virtues and these vicious circles that start from this baseline of being successful at NoFap or unsuccessful at NoFap. Eventually, over the months and over the years, I just felt trapped in this loop or in this cycle of feeling very good and feeling very bad, feeling very good, feeling very bad. Almost like a bipolar disorder, with phases where everything's perfect and phases where everything's just utter sadness and hopelessness. Yeah, at the beginning, I would say I could just say, okay, I just wasn't disciplined enough. So if I will be even more disciplined, then I will be able to always be happy or successful. Always stay in this virtuous circle, basically. But yeah, that's essentially an ideal that won't ever be fulfilled. That can't ever be fulfilled. And I also had streaks or phases where I wouldn't watch porn, masturbate, or have an orgasm for months on end. So streaks that would last for more than 100 days, sometimes I think around 170 or something was like my record, so to speak, or maybe 140. Also doesn't really matter. Yeah, but eventually that was so tiring, like to feel really good and feel really bad, even though sometimes it was in a very short period of time, sometimes in a very long period of time. And then that also wasn't the only problem or the only struggle that came with this practice. But eventually I also noticed that I wasn't really deepening or learning or feeling any progress in my relationships towards women. I mean, to some degree, I was maybe a little bit more successful when it came to dating, but it was in a very unsustainable way, or it wasn't healthy. It was just sometimes a little bit, and then also not at all again. Yeah, and what I mean by this is that NoFap, it created like this extreme neediness in a sense inside of me, because I didn't want to pleasure myself, I was kind of in need of women to do this job for me, which sounds very unromantic or not very desirable, but essentially that's what it came down to or back to. And yeah, that's something that doesn't really work, or that's also not attractive, as you can imagine. And when I would meet women, then at the start or at the beginning, like everything was fine, and I actually felt attractive, and I felt good about myself, and I was feeling this connection with a woman and this rapport. And I felt grounded and just like myself, but it then quickly just shifted, because as soon as there started to be sexual attraction and the contact that deepened, then I would just again just lose my ground, lose my foundation, because it just became too much, like, to handle. The horniness just became unbearable, and then it kind of needed an outlet, and then I would relapse, and then I would feel bad, and then the woman would think, okay, why is he so different all of a sudden, and was just all very messy. And this leads me to the next point, that for me, and I feel like this is true for a lot of other men, NoFap, it doesn't come from a place of loving yourself. It didn't came from a place of loving myself. It came from this place of, I'm not good enough, I'm a failure, I won't ever succeed with women. Like all of these negative beliefs, essentially, all these negative stories about ourselves that I also had about myself. And then NoFap becomes this coping mechanism, this, if I will do this, then I will be worthy. But then you're essentially just confirming to yourself by practicing NoFap that you're not worthy, because you're reinforcing this belief by behaving in a way that wants to destroy this belief. If that makes sense. And your relief just more and more gets confirmed when you relapse then, which will always happen. So you can't really get out of feeling unworthy by doing something that's based on feeling unworthy. And eventually this would always shine through in my relationship with women, also with other people and other relationships that were with other guys or just friendships. Where it wouldn't be so drastic or anything, but then there were also phases where I wouldn't be able to meet friends or just go outside because I felt like shit. And then also some relationship would suffer from that. Yeah. And then there's also this topic of flatlines, which is something like you practicing NoFap and you're doing it, you're not watching porn, you're not masturbating, you don't have any orgasms, but you still feel depressed, essentially. That's what's called a flatline in the NoFap community or lingo. And I more and more experienced these flatlines. So I was feeling bad even though I was practicing NoFap and semen retention. And eventually it got so bad that it really turned towards suicidal depression. Or I really often then had phases where I had suicidal ideations, because I was not allowing myself to experience sexual pleasure. And I was essentially just very hard on myself. I wasn't showing myself any love or care or affection. I was just, I need to do more, I need to do more, I need to be better. So constantly telling myself, I'm not enough, I'm not enough, I'm not enough. Constantly rejecting myself, essentially, which also led to women rejecting me. Yeah, but then I wasn't only just taking sexual pleasure away from me, I was also taking pleasure in food away from me. So I would get very strict about my diet, like intermittent fasting and no fast food, no sugar, and just getting very extreme. And then at the same time, I need to go to the gym and do sports 6 times a week, or just very often. And then just everything became about just being productive, like all the single areas in my life. And yeah, it makes sense that then eventually you become just very depressed and sad or lonely, because I wasn't allowing myself really to socialize or just to have free time, to have time to play and just enjoy myself, have a good time. Everything was just about being hard on myself. And yeah, then I felt like I didn't have any joy. I felt like I was a failure, that I will never be successful with women, that I will not be successful in life in general. And I felt very disconnected from myself, and then also disconnected from friends and family members and other people. Oof, and then yeah, that's a very hard place. That's a very uncomfortable place to be in. When you don't like yourself, you don't love yourself, you don't feel connection to anything, you don't feel that anything would make any difference. And then it makes sense to feel like, okay, maybe suicide, maybe ending your life is like the only option to become free of this pain and all the suffering. And fortunately enough, I never had this intention to really kill myself or to really do it. It was just like this thought that came to my mind and that sometimes would just be lingering there, because it was like the only thing that represented a certain kind of hope, a certain kind of relief from the situation that I was in. And then eventually the only way I would find relief is just to masturbate again or to watch porn again, because in having an orgasm, like there's this small moment, a small window where you're like free from yourself, from your pain and your suffering. Yeah, but then I would still feel bad because I didn't want to masturbate, and then I did it again. So yeah, it was just very difficult for me, or not very healthy in a way. And yeah, something that I didn't mention is also blue balls, which is something where you're very stimulated sexually, but you don't act on it. And then at some point you really have like physical pain from this. That also often happened to me. From what I can tell, it's not really something that's causing any long-term damage or anything, but sometimes just for a day or in short term can be very painful and unpleasant. So I thought I also need to mention this that's also something that sometimes happened. But yeah, I guess the question then becomes, I will get to this, but just from all that I just said, it makes sense that eventually I started to doubt if I should practice NoFap, if NoFap and semen retention are really this answer to all of my problems. Which sometimes it can be so glorified in the NoFap, and especially the semen retention community, as this holy grail of self-improvement, this holy grail of personal development and spirituality in general, this one solution for all the problems we have. Eventually I just started to doubt that more and more, and I wasn't so sure about it anymore. But I also had this fear of, okay, if I don't do it anymore, I will just go back to being insecure all the time and feeling bad all the time. Which I was anyway. Yeah, but eventually I managed to let go of this practice, which was only like a year ago. And then I also came back to this practice because I wasn't feeling good, and then I thought, yeah, maybe I should just do it again. Maybe I would give it another try, but again, it didn't really work. Yeah, so the question is then, now what do I do now? How is my relationship now with pleasuring myself, with porn, with having an orgasm? And for me personally, it was very valuable to, for once, just like let go of all the restrictions. So to allow myself to watch porn again, to just masturbate however often I wanted to just see how it is, like without all the restrictions. And then something that I also found is just no porn instead of NoFap. On Reddit, there's also subreddit, which is called pornfree. And I saw this in a lot of people, or a lot of guys, also some women, who eventually gravitate towards just not watching porn, but still masturbating, who also maybe practice NoFap for some time. And I feel like this is a very healthy approach, because you still allow yourself to pleasure yourself, to use your imagination, and to get comfortable, to explore and discover your own sexuality and what you like, what you don't like. But it's without porn, which sometimes, or often, maybe most of the time, is just too much stimulation, and also sometimes too extreme in the images, the videos, the audio. And now this is something that I'm exploring, this no porn. And then additionally to no porn, I also started to basically now practice mindful masturbation, which is also very aligned with my inclination to mindfulness, meditation, and Zen in general. But for me, this is more about just bringing my own awareness, my intuition, my feelings, my sensitivity into the act of masturbation. So really just seeing, okay, how do I feel right now? Do I just want to enjoy myself and have a good time? Or am I just doing this to escape from something, or because I have a certain tension inside of me that's unresolved, and I want to break free from it by chasing an orgasm. And also noticing how I feel after masturbation, during masturbation, like what comes up inside of me, what feelings, what thoughts, and just really see, just really feel how it's affecting me and what kind of joy it brings me and how it's affecting my life in general. Not in the sense of, oh, I really need to be analytic now. What is this doing? No, but just more experiencing it, feeling it, being with it. But from a place of accepting myself, loving myself, appreciating myself, and being open, being vulnerable, not bringing in my mind with all of its assumptions about what's right and wrong. And this has also been important for me to really just acknowledge that I really appreciate women, that I desire women, or that I'm attracted to women. To not try to fight this, but to embrace it and to become comfortable with it. And for me this feels way better, more joyful, more sustainable, to essentially act from this place of compassion and to also include my own sexuality, my own sexual expression in this compassion, which makes it more whole in a sense, because then there's not only this rough side of sexual expression or this need for an orgasm inside of sexual expression, which can be very rough or intense. So then it gets balanced with kindness and appreciation. And then, it's for me just more integrated into myself and feels just way better than being so hard on myself all the time with practicing NoFap and with practicing semen retention.